I showed up to my father's lavish retirement party carrying a $27 million secret in my purse. Instead of a welcome, I heard my stepmother whisper to a table of elite guests to look at the frigid daughter who cannot do anything right. Less than an hour later, she signaled a security guard and sneered for him to remove this useless woman. I walked out of that ballroom in complete silence, leaving a single black envelope on a cocktail table. By 8 o'clock the next morning, my family was staring at a $0 bank balance, and they were the ones begging to be let into my building. Before I tell you how I legally bought my father's entire life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to let your massive success be your loudest revenge. The Grand Oak Country Club smelled of old money, expensive cigar smoke, and desperate validation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the ballroom, reflecting off the diamond tennis bracelets and platinum watches of Atlanta's high society. I stood near the entrance, smoothing the front of my bespoke emerald silk slip dress. It was a quiet luxury piece, completely devoid of flashy logos, but stitched with meticulous perfection. I was 32 years old, the chief executive officer of Obsidian Holdings, a commercial debt acquisition firm I built from the ground up. But to the people in this room, I was just Zuri Jenkins, the 32-year-old college dropout who could never manage to hold down a respectable corporate job. My father, Marcus Jenkins, was the man of the hour. He was retiring as the chief financial officer of a massive logistics firm. He was a proud Morehouse alumnus who cared more about his country club status and rubbing elbows with generational wealth than he ever cared about his eldest daughter. He stood at the front of the room holding a crystal tumbler of scotch surrounded by a crowd of sycophants. Beside him stood my stepmother, Valerie. She wore a gaudy beaded gown that screamed for attention, clutching a tall glass of champagne. As I took a step into the ballroom, her eyes locked onto me. Her fake smile vanished instantly. She leaned into a group of wives from the country club board and whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "Look who decided to show up. There is the frigid daughter who cannot do anything right. Poor Marcus having to deal with her gloomy presence on his special night." The women offered me tight, pitying smiles before turning their backs. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I simply walked toward the center of the room, clutching a sleek black envelope. It contained a detailed financial dossier. It was a warning that could save my father from complete financial ruin. I had uncovered the truth about his precious son-in-law, and despite decades of emotional neglect, some small, lingering part of me wanted to give Marcus a chance to save himself. I waited as Marcus stepped up to the mahogany podium to give his toast. The string quartet faded into silence and the room erupted into applause. Marcus beamed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate my legacy," he boomed into the microphone. "I have spent my entire life building a name in Atlanta, ensuring that the Jenkins family represents excellence. I expected my children to elevate this family, and I am proud to say that my youngest daughter has done exactly that." He gestured grandly to Kendra, my 28-year-old half-sister. Kendra was the golden child. She had never worked a hard day in her life, but she somehow held the title of Vice President of Acquisitions at her husband's firm. She smiled brightly, waving to the crowd in her shimmering designer dress. Beside her stood Bradley Pierce, Kendra's white husband. Marcus pointed at him with absolute reverence. "And of course I have to toast my brilliant son-in-law, Brad. He is a Wall Street genius, a master fund manager who has single-handedly doubled my retirement portfolio. He is the future of this family's wealth." Brad stepped forward to take the microphone. He wore a tuxedo that was tailored a little too tightly, his hair slicked back with an unnatural shine. He constantly tried too hard to fit in with Marcus's wealthy black circle. "What is good, family?" Brad said into the microphone, using a forced, cringeworthy accent that made my skin crawl. "We are making big moves tonight, you feel me? Just securing the bag and elevating the Jenkins empire. Shout out to Marcus for trusting the vision." I felt physically sick. The man standing on that stage was not a financial genius. He was a complete fraud. He was a gambling addict who used forced slang to sound relatable while funneling my father's retirement capital into offshore sinkholes to cover his massive debts. He had leveraged my father's entire estate, and Marcus was too blinded by the illusion of proximity to white wealth to see that he was being robbed blind. When the speeches ended and the crowd dispersed to fetch more drinks, I walked directly up to the podium. Marcus, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the dad title. I brought you a gift. I held out the black envelope. I highly suggest you open it before midnight. It contains critical information about your accounts. Valerie swooped in immediately, her manicured hand slapping the envelope away. It landed on a nearby cocktail table. We do not need your cheap gifts. Valerie sneered, her voice trembling with venom. What is in there? A handmade card, a plea for a handout to pay your rent. You show up here looking like a mortician trying to ruin your father's retirement night. Brad sauntered over, wrapping an arm around Kendra. Yo, Zuri. Come on now, sis, he said, putting his free hand up in a placating, exaggerated gesture. Do not bring bad vibes to the cookout. We are celebrating big moves tonight. Just head out gracefully before things get messy. I looked Brad slowly up and down, dissecting him with a single razor-sharp glance. The only thing you have ever moved, Brad, is my father's retirement capital into your own pocket. But we are not talking about that yet. Marcus's face turned purple with rage. He stepped closer, towering over me, his deep voice rumbling through the ballroom. That is enough, Zuri. Brad is doubling my money while you are out there doing whatever it is you do. I spent my life building a legacy, and you are a 32-year-old dropout who cannot even hold down a proper job. You show up here causing a scene, disrespecting my son-in-law. You are a useless daughter, Zuri. You bring nothing to this table. The words hit the air heavy and toxic. The whispers from the guests grew louder, buzzing around me. Valerie signaled a guard standing by the double doors. Security, remove this useless woman, she barked. She is ruining the photos. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not attempt to defend myself. I just calmly picked up my clutch. A useless daughter, I repeated, tasting the words on my tongue. I offered a small, terrifyingly cold smile. All right. Happy retirement, Marcus. Enjoy the illusion while you can. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me, averting their eyes, but continuing to whisper. I kept my posture flawless, my steps measured, and completely unbothered. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the country club, stepping out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night. I left the black envelope on the table. They had made their choice, and I was about to make mine. The crisp night air hit my face the moment I stepped off the portico of the country club. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the toxic energy of the ballroom wash off me. I did not wait for a taxi. I did not walk toward the street. I simply stood by the curb for exactly 4 seconds before a customized midnight black Maybach glided silently up to the entrance. The valet rushed forward, his eyes wide as he took in the sheer presence of the vehicle. My driver, Hayes, stepped out. He was a former military contractor who understood the value of absolute discretion. He opened the heavy rear door and bowed his head slightly. Good evening, Ms. Jenkins. Thank you, Hayes, I said, slipping a crisp $100 bill to the stunned valet before sliding into the cavernous back seat. The heavy door shut with a solid thud, instantly sealing me inside a soundproof cabin. The chaos of the country club vanished. I tapped the privacy screen separating me from the front seat. Take me to the penthouse, Hayes. We have an early morning tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. I opened the concealed compartment beside me and pulled out my encrypted tablet. The soft blue glow of the screen illuminated the dark interior of the car as I rapidly typed in a sequence of biometric passcodes. I brought up my secure communications channel and dialed my lead attorney, David Sterling. He answered on the exact first ring. Good evening, Ms. Jenkins. How was the retirement gala? David asked. His voice was crisp, professional, and entirely aware of my family dynamics. Short, I replied, my voice like cracking ice. Marcus called me a useless daughter in front of 200 people. Valerie tried to have me physically thrown out by security. David sighed heavily over the line. I am sorry to hear that, Zuri. Truly. Do not be sorry. I tapped the screen, bringing up the financial dossiers of Pierce Capital. The clock just ran out on them. Execute the hostile takeover. Pull the trigger on the debt acquisition. Are you absolutely certain? David asked, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background. I have the paperwork ready to file across all jurisdictions, but once I hit this button, there is no reversing it. This will trigger an immediate and unmitigable default on your father's entire estate. Brad Pierce leveraged Marcus's entire portfolio to the absolute hilt. The mansion in Buckhead, the country club equity shares the liquid retirement funds. Brad used all of it as collateral to cover his massive margin calls from last quarter. If we move now, the central bank will panic. I am fully aware of what that idiot did, I stated coldly. Brad thought he could play fast and loose with my father's money to cover his Wall Street gambling debts. He thought no one would notice the shell companies he set up in the Caymans. Activate the clause immediately. I want Obsidian Holdings to absorb the debt completely. I own his firm's debt now, which means I own them. Consider it done. And the remaining capital, move the $27 million in liquid cash into the blind trust right now. Lock it down completely. No one touches it. No one traces it without my direct biometric authorization. When the bank issues the margin call tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Brad will not have a single cent to cover his spread. And Marcus will wake up to realize his financial genius son-in-law just bankrupted his entire bloodline. The transfers are initializing as we speak, David confirmed. The progress bar on my tablet confirmed the massive movement of funds. The $27 million is secured in the trust. The debt acquisition of Pierce Capital is finalized. Obsidian Holdings is now the primary creditor for Marcus Jenkins and Bradley Pierce. The seizure notices will hit their inboxes by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Perfect, I said, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water from the Maybach's mini fridge. Zuri, when they find out Obsidian Holdings bought the debt, they still will not know you are the CEO, David warned. They think you are a low-level freelancer living in a run-down apartment. They are going to look for a corporate ghost. They are going to find out very soon, I replied, a dangerous smirk playing on my lips. Let them sleep well tonight. It is the last peaceful night of sleep they will ever have. I disconnected the call and tossed the tablet onto the seat beside me. I leaned my head back against the plush leather headrest, watching the glowing skyline of Atlanta blur past the tinted windows. For 32 years, I had been the scapegoat. When I struggled with burnout in college and took a gap year, they called me a dropout. When I refused to join Marcus's country club and play respectability politics, they called me antisocial. When I quietly took the $50,000 my biological mother had left me in a hidden life insurance policy and vanished to build my own investment firm, they told everyone I was a broke, jobless wanderer. They loved the narrative. It made Kendra look better. It made Valerie feel superior. It made Marcus feel like a powerful patriarch who had to carry the burden of a failed child. They needed me to be the disappointment so they could play the role of the perfect elite family. I took a slow sip of my water, feeling the cold liquid ground me in the present moment. I had spent 5 years building Obsidian Holdings from the ground up, specializing in buying distressed commercial debt and liquidating toxic assets. I had amassed a fortune of $27 million in pure liquidity, all while my family thought I could not afford my own groceries. They thought I was begging for scraps, completely blind to the fact that I owned the very table they were eating from. As the car glided smoothly through the city streets, my phone buzzed in my purse. It was the personal cell phone I kept strictly for family emergencies. I pulled it out and looked at the bright screen. It was a text message from Kendra. You really embarrassed Daddy tonight. Do not ever show your face around us again. Brad says he pities you. Get a life, Zuri. I stared at the glowing text message for exactly 3 seconds. I did not block the number. I did not type out an angry reply defending myself. I did not shed a single tear over my sister's cruel words. I simply locked the screen and dropped the phone back into my designer bag. Get a life, I thought to myself, leaning back into the luxurious leather. I just bought yours. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse in Midtown Atlanta, casting long golden shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. The city below was waking up a sprawling grid of ambition and hustle, but I had been awake since 5 o'clock. I was in the middle of my morning Pilates routine on the terrace, my breathing steady, my core engaged. I was completely unbothered by the sheer magnitude of the financial bomb I had just detonated across the state. The air was crisp, and the world felt entirely under my control. At exactly 8:15, my personal cell phone, the cheap plastic device I kept solely for family emergencies, began to vibrate against the marble kitchen island inside. It buzzed once, then again. Then it erupted into a continuous, desperate hum that vibrated so violently it threatened to slide right off the edge of the stone counter. I finished my final set with perfect form, wiped a light sheen of sweat from my forehead with a microfiber towel, and walked leisurely toward the kitchen. I did not rush. I picked up the phone and looked at the bright screen. 14 missed calls from Marcus. 22 missed calls from Valerie. 20 missed calls from Kendra. 56 missed calls in the span of 15 minutes. I poured myself a shot of rich, dark espresso from the machine, leaning against the cool marble as the screen lit up with another incoming call. This time, the caller ID read Brad. I watched his name flash, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. I let it ring out. The voicemail notification popped up a second later. I tapped the screen, putting the message on speakerphone while I picked up my tablet to check the morning financial briefs from my executive team. 3 miles away inside the sprawling, gated Buckhead mansion, I knew exactly what absolute chaos had erupted. The timing was perfectly aligned with the opening of the financial markets. I could picture the exact scene unfolding in Marcus Jenkins's lavish home office. He would be standing in front of his mahogany desk, staring at his computer screen as if it were written in an alien language. Every single account balance, his personal checking, his high-yield savings, his robust corporate retirement fund, the joint accounts he shared with Valerie, would read $0.00. Beside those glaring zeros would be a stark, flashing red notification. Assets frozen. Seized by primary creditor. Obsidian Holdings, LLC. I knew Marcus. I knew his temper. He would be slamming his fists onto his desk, roaring for his brilliant son-in-law to get in there. Brad would stumble into the office, his usually slicked-back hair falling into his eyes, his face the color of wet chalk. He would be holding his cell phone with a death grip, his hands visibly shaking. Kendra would be right behind him, clutching her silk robe tightly around herself, her eyes wide with terror as the reality of her evaporating lifestyle set in. Marcus would demand an explanation. He would scream that the bank just told him Pierce Capital was insolvent, that Brad had leveraged the house and the retirement funds to the absolute hilt. Brad, completely stripped of his forced slang and fake urban bravado, would stammer like a terrified little boy caught in a lie. He would try to explain that the market took a sudden dip last quarter. He would plead that he just took out a small margin loan to cover the spread, that he used the Buckhead mansion as collateral because it was supposed to be a temporary fix. It was a sure thing, he would say. Then Valerie would run into the room shrieking that her premium credit cards were just declined at the local luxury coffee shop. She would yell that she tried to buy a simple latte and was treated like a common criminal by the barista. Kendra would shake Brad's arm, begging him to fix it, demanding he call the bank and throw his weight around as a fund manager. And Brad would have to admit the devastating truth. He could not fix it. The debt was bought out. Some massive shadow firm called Obsidian Holdings swept in at midnight and bought all his distressed debt from the central bank. They called in the loan immediately. They want the cash right now, or they take everything. Marcus would yell, grabbing Brad by his expensive pajamas, demanding to know who runs Obsidian Holdings. He would order Brad to call the CEO and set up a meeting so Marcus could tell them who he is in Atlanta society. Brad would gasp and pull away, admitting that it is a blind trust, a ghost company that just swallowed them whole. The frantic, breathy voice of my father blasted through my phone speaker, pulling me back to the quiet sanctuary of my kitchen. Zuri. Zuri, pick up the phone. His voice was completely devoid of the booming, authoritative tone he had used at the country club just 12 hours prior. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. Something is wrong with the accounts. The bank just called me. They froze everything. They said Brad's firm defaulted on a margin call and that my house Zuri, is being seized by a commercial creditor called Obsidian Holdings. Pick up the phone. You need to call Brad. We need to figure out if you can take out a personal loan to help us with legal fees. I deleted the voicemail halfway through his pathetic rambling. He still thought I was just a pawn, someone he could exploit to clean up the mess his golden son-in-law had created. A text message immediately flashed across the screen. Call me back right now. Brad's funds are gone. The bank locked us out. Valerie is having a panic attack. Call me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, savoring the bitter, complex flavor. I placed the delicate cup down on the marble counter, picked up the phone, and typed out a single, precise reply. I am currently busy being a useless daughter. Try calling an Uber. I hit send. I did not block his number yet. I wanted to leave the line open just long enough for them to realize that the lifeline they were desperately grasping for was the very hand holding the blade. I set the phone face down, turned my back on it, and walked toward my expansive closet to select my sharpest designer suit. They were going to come looking for me, and I needed to be dressed for a slaughter. My security detail was already tracking their movements. Hayes had tapped into the city traffic grid and was giving me live updates through my earpiece as I buttoned my tailored blazer. I did not have to guess what my family was doing. I knew their playbook. They were desperate, and desperate people always returned to the last place they felt superior. They piled into Marcus's remaining vehicle, a luxury SUV that technically belonged to the bank as of 8 o'clock this morning. Marcus drove like a maniac, his knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. The atmosphere inside that car must have been suffocating. Kendra was likely sobbing in the back seat, furiously tapping her phone to check if any of her platinum credit cards had miraculously unfrozen. Valerie would be complaining about the sudden detour into a neighborhood she considered beneath her. And Brad, the fake Wall Street prodigy, was undoubtedly sweating through his designer shirt, frantically scrolling through his phone, trying to find a loophole that did not exist. They were heading straight to the rundown college apartment complex on the edge of the city. It was the last address they had on file for me. 5 years ago, when they officially cut me off and told me I was a disgrace to the Jenkins name, that tiny, roach-infested unit was where I had laid my head. I had kept the mailing address active on a few old, meaningless accounts, just to maintain the illusion of my stagnation. They loved believing I was stuck in that squalor. It fueled their superiority complex. When Marcus slammed on the brakes outside the dilapidated brick building, the reality of their situation must have hit them hard. The security gate was broken, stuck permanently open. The parking lot was full of beat-up sedans and overflowing dumpsters. Valerie probably hesitated to even step out of the SUV in her $1,000 heels, looking at the cracked pavement with absolute disgust. But Marcus did not care. He was a man possessed. He stormed up the 3 flights of concrete stairs, not even waiting for the others. Brad hurried after him, panting and out of breath, desperately trying to maintain the facade that he could handle this. "Come on, Marcus. Let me talk to her," Brad probably pleaded, using that fake, overly familiar tone. "She is just acting out. I will get her to sign over a line of credit. I just need a few grand to open a bridge account and we can reverse the margin call. I promise you, man, I got this." Marcus ignored him. He reached apartment 3B and began pounding on the peeling wooden door with a heavy fist. He did not knock like a father checking on his child. He pounded like a debt collector. "Zuri, open this door right now," Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing down the dingy breezeway. "I know you are in there. Do not play games with me. Open the door. We need you to take out a personal loan today. Brad made a clerical error and the bank is holding our funds hostage. Open up." Valerie, finally reaching the 3rd floor with Kendra in tow, crossed her arms tightly. "Tell her to hurry up, Marcus. This hallway smells like cheap takeout and failure. I am not standing out here all day. She owes us for everything we put up with yesterday." Kendra sniffled, wiping her mascara. "Tell her I need $5,000 right now just to cover my personal trainer and my brunch tab. She has to have decent credit. She never buys anything nice anyway." Marcus pounded again, harder this time. "Zuri, I am your father and I am giving you a direct order. The deadbolt clicked. The heavy door groaned open. But the person standing on the other side was not a 32-year-old frustrated dropout. It was a 20-year-old college student wearing oversized pajama pants and a graphic tee holding a bowl of cereal. The student stared at the four angry, overdressed people standing on the welcome mat with complete bewilderment. "Can I help you?" the student asked, blinking sleepily. Marcus pushed his way forward, trying to look past the student into the tiny living room. "Where is Zuri? Tell my daughter to get out here right now. She is not hiding from me." The student frowned, tightening their grip on the door handle. "Who is Zuri?" "There is no one named Zuri here. Stop lying to me," Marcus barked, his patience completely gone. "Zuri Jenkins. Tall, wears too much black, always has a bad attitude. Go get her." "Dude, I have no idea who you are talking about," the student replied, their voice rising in defense. "I have lived in this unit for 2 years. The guy who lived here before me was named Kevin. No, Zuri has been on this lease in at least half a decade. Now back up before I call the cops." The door slammed shut in Marcus's face. The heavy deadbolt slid into place with a loud final click. Marcus stood frozen on the concrete walkway. Valerie's mouth fell open. Kendra stopped crying. For the first time in 5 years, the reality of their sheer ignorance slapped them across the face. They had spent half a decade bragging to their country club friends about my fictional overseas business trips to save face, while privately mocking my supposed poverty. Yet they had never once checked on me. They did not know my phone number. They did not know my address. They did not know a single thing about the woman I had become. Marcus turned around, his face completely drained of color. "She is gone. She has not lived here in 5 years. "Then where the hell is she?" Valerie shrieked, her panic returning with a vengeance. "How are we supposed to get money if we cannot find her? We are going to be homeless by Friday." Marcus. Suddenly a loud chime echoed in the breezeway. It was Brad's phone. He had been frantically searching the internet all morning, setting up Google alerts for Obsidian Holdings, and my name desperate to find a loophole in the corporate registry. He stared at the screen, his eyes widening to the size of saucers. "I found her!" Brad gasped, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the device. "I pulled the state corporate registry for Obsidian Holdings. Zuri's name just popped up on the public filing. She is listed at their corporate headquarters." Marcus snatched the phone from Brad's hands. He read the address aloud. It was a premium AAA glass skyscraper located dead in the center of the financial district. It was the most expensive commercial real estate in Atlanta. Valerie let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. Her delusion was so deeply ingrained that her brain immediately constructed a scenario that protected her fragile ego. "I knew it," she sneered, adjusting her designer handbag. "She is not hiding. She just finally got a real job. She must be a secretary or an administrative assistant for this Obsidian company." Kendra's eyes lit up with renewed entitlement. "Oh my God, you are right. She works for the people who bought our debt. She probably answers their phones." Marcus's posture straightened. His arrogance immediately returned, blinding him to the obvious red flags. "If she works in the executive suite, she has access. She can get us a meeting with the CEO of this shadow firm. Or better yet, she can use her corporate credentials to secure us a bridge loan. She works for them, which means we have leverage." "Get back in the car," Marcus ordered, storming toward the stairwell. "We are heading downtown. We are going to walk into that building, find her desk, and she is going to fix this. She owes this family her life." They scrambled down the stairs, piling back into the SUV with renewed toxic energy. They aimed their desperation straight toward the financial district, fully believing they were about to bully a low-level receptionist into saving their crumbling empire. Back in my penthouse, Hayes's voice crackled softly in my earpiece. "They are en route to the tower, Ms. Jenkins. Estimated time of arrival is 20 minutes. "Understood," I replied smoothly. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer and grabbed my briefcase. "Let the lobby security know we are expecting guests. Do not block them at the door. Let them come all the way inside. I want them to see everything." The bank-owned SUV screeched to a halt outside the towering glass facade of Obsidian Holdings. The building dominated the Atlanta financial district, a monolith of black glass and brushed steel that screamed wealth and absolute power. Valets in tailored uniforms stepped forward to open the doors, assuming the frantic occupants were VIP clients. Marcus brushed past them without a single word, his face flushed with a toxic mixture of rage and absolute desperation. Valerie adjusted her designer jacket, desperately trying to maintain an air of superiority as she stepped onto the pristine pavement. Kendra gripped Brad's arm, her heels clicking rapidly as they followed Marcus through the massive revolving doors. Inside the lobby was a cathedral of modern corporate dominance. Polished black marble floors reflected the geometric lighting above. A massive abstract sculpture of obsidian stone anchored the center of the expansive room. The air was cool, smelling faintly of expensive cedar and old money. It was a place designed to make visitors feel incredibly small. Marcus, however, was completely blind to the intimidation tactics of the architecture. His wounded ego drove him forward like a battering ram. He marched directly to the front reception desk. It was a massive slab of white marble manned by a single impeccably dressed woman wearing a discreet headset. She looked up, her expression a mask of polite neutrality. "I need to see Zuri Jenkins," Marcus commanded, placing both hands flat on the cold marble counter. "Call her down right now. Tell her it is her father." "Good morning, sir," the receptionist replied, her voice smooth and entirely unbothered. "Do you have an appointment with Miss Jenkins?" "I do not need an appointment to see my own daughter," Marcus barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "She is a secretary here, or whatever entry-level position you people gave her. This is a family emergency. Get her on the phone immediately." Valerie stepped up beside her husband, tapping her manicured nails impatiently against her luxury handbag. "Look, we do not have time for corporate red tape today. Our family is dealing with a massive financial crisis caused by this very company. We know Zuri works here. Just pull her out of her cubicle and send her down. Her manager will understand." The receptionist did not reach for her phone. She did not look intimidated. She simply locked eyes with Marcus. "I am sorry, sir, but without a scheduled appointment, I cannot authorize anyone to pass through the security gates. I must ask you to lower your voice or step outside." Marcus's face contorted with fury. He was a man used to getting his way, a man who built his entire identity on respectability and status. "Do you know who I am?" he roared. "I am Marcus Jenkins. I am a prominent Morehouse alumnus. I sit on the board of the Grand Oak Country Club. I am a pillar of the Atlanta business community. You are going to pick up that phone and call Zuri down here right this second, or I will have your job by the end of the day." Brad pushed his way to the front, sweating profusely, trying to use his fake corporate bravado to smooth things over. "Listen, sweetheart, let us just bypass the formalities. I am a Wall Street fund manager. I know how these big firms operate. Just dial her extension. Tell her Brad needs her to pull a solid for the family. We just need her to vouch for us with the executives upstairs so we can get a bridge loan approved. It is an easy fix." The receptionist looked at Brad with complete disdain. She did not speak a single word. She simply dropped her hand below the desk and pressed a concealed button. "If you are not going to call her, I will find her myself," Marcus snarled. He pushed away from the desk and began marching aggressively toward the gleaming silver security turnstiles that guarded the elevator banks. Valerie, Kendra, and Brad hurried after him, fully believing their sheer entitlement would grant them access to the upper floors. They did not make it 3 steps. From the shadows of the expansive lobby, 4 massive security guards materialized. They wore tailored black suits with discreet earpieces, their expressions deadly serious. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, forming an impenetrable human wall directly in front of the turnstiles. "Step back, sir," the lead guard commanded. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that demanded instant obedience. He crossed his arms, his massive frame blocking Marcus completely. "You are trespassing in a restricted corporate facility. Return to the reception desk or exit the building." Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his chest heaving. "Do not put your hands on me. I am a respected executive. My daughter works in this building. I demand to be let through." "No appointment, no entry." The guard replied, completely unfazed by Marcus's tantrum. "Step back now." Kendra let out a shrill gasp, grabbing Brad's arm. "Brad, do something. Tell them who you are. They cannot treat us like criminals." Brad swallowed hard, taking a cowardly step backward. His fake bravado had completely evaporated. He was entirely out of his depth, surrounded by wealth and power he could not even begin to comprehend. Valerie shrieked, her voice cracking with indignation. "This is outrageous. When Zuri's boss hears about this, he is going to fire her for bringing this kind of embarrassment to the company. You are all going to regret treating us this way." Marcus raised his finger, pointing it aggressively at the lead guard. "I am going to call the police. I am going to call the local news. You have no right to keep a father from his child." The guard did not blink. He just stared Marcus down, an immovable mountain of muscle and corporate authority. Suddenly, the chaotic screaming of the family was interrupted by a soft melodic chime. The sound echoed crisply through the cavernous lobby, cutting through Marcus's rage and Valerie's screeching. It did not come from the standard employee elevator banks behind the turnstiles. It came from a solitary gold-plated elevator tucked away in a private alcove to the right, a designated lift reserved exclusively for the highest echelons of corporate power. The heavy brushed gold doors glided open with a silent, terrifying smoothness. Instantly, the entire atmosphere of the lobby shifted. The receptionist stood up straight from her desk, her posture rigidly professional. The four massive security guards immediately stepped back, parting their impenetrable wall like the Red Sea. They turned toward the gold elevator, clasped their hands in front of them, and bowed their heads in deep, unwavering respect. Zuri stepped out of the gold-plated elevator, and the air in the lobby seemed to freeze. She was not wearing the faded college sweatshirts or cheap clearance rack clothes her family associated with her. She wore a razor-sharp, tailored crimson Tom Ford suit. The cut was immaculate, accentuating her fierce posture and absolute authority. Her hair was pulled back into a flawless, sleek chignon. In her right hand, she held a delicate porcelain espresso cup, the dark liquid inside completely undisturbed by her smooth, measured steps. "Good morning, Madam CEO," the lead security guard said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the lobby. "Good morning, Madam CEO," the receptionist echoed, remaining perfectly upright behind the marble desk. Marcus Jenkins stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. The vein in his neck, which had been throbbing with rage just seconds before, seemed to stop pulsing altogether. He looked at the security guards. He looked at the receptionist. Then he looked at his eldest daughter. His brain violently rejected the information his eyes were feeding him. The cognitive dissonance was so absolute that he literally took a step backward, nearly tripping over Valerie's designer shoes. Valerie was staring at the Tom Ford suit. She knew the brand. She knew the price tag. Her eyes darted wildly from the gold elevator to the bowing guards, her mind desperately trying to construct a narrative that fit her incredibly narrow worldview. "Zuri, what on earth are you doing?" Marcus finally stammered. His voice was a weak, hollow shadow of the booming patriarch he pretended to be. "Why are they calling you that? Did you steal an executive's keycard? You are going to get arrested. Stop playing games and tell these guards to let us up. We need to speak to your boss right now." Zuri did not answer immediately. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her espresso cup. The clinking of the porcelain as she placed it on the saucer sounded like a judge's gavel in the silent lobby. She walked forward, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The security guards remained in their defensive stance, but they subtly shifted to create a protective perimeter around her. "I do not have a boss," Marcus Zuri said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and terrifyingly cold. Brad let out a whimpering sound. He had been standing behind Kendra, trying to make himself as small as possible. As a man who worshipped corporate hierarchies, he understood exactly what the gold elevator meant. He understood what the bowing guards meant. His face turned an ashen shade of gray, and his knees physically buckled, forcing him to lean heavily against the security turnstile to stay upright. "Do not be ridiculous," Valerie hissed, finding her voice. Her tone was shrill, laced with an escalating panic she was trying desperately to suppress. "You are a college dropout. You live in a roach-infested apartment. You probably lied on your resume to get a job answering phones here. Marcus, tell her to stop this nonsense. Tell her to get the manager." Zuri stopped 10 feet away from her family. She looked at Valerie with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. I moved out of that apartment 4 years ago, Valerie. I live in a penthouse 3 blocks from here. I just wanted to see how long it would take for any of you to actually check on me. Half a decade passed, and not one of you bothered to confirm if I was dead or alive, until this morning, until you needed money. Marcus shook his head violently. This is a trick. This is some kind of sick joke. You cannot be the CEO of Obsidian Holdings. That is a multi-million-dollar commercial debt acquisition firm. Brad said they bought out Pierce Capital overnight. Zuri offered a chilling smile. Brad is surprisingly accurate for a man who does not possess a valid brokerage license. Kendra gasped, spinning around to look at her husband. Brad, what is she talking about? What does she mean you do not have a license? Brad could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he stared at Zuri with the wide, terrified eyes of a prey animal caught in a snare. Obsidian Holdings is not my employer, Marcus Zuri stated clearly, ensuring her voice carried across the grand lobby. Obsidian Holdings is my empire. I built it from the ground up. I own every share. I make every executive decision. And as of midnight last night, I made the executive decision to acquire the entirety of Pierce Capital's distressed, highly toxic debt. Marcus grabbed his chest, his breathing turning ragged. No, that is impossible. You are a useless daughter. You bring nothing to the table. You said so yourself last night. I said I was busy being a useless daughter, Zuri corrected smoothly. Because letting you believe your own toxic delusions was far more entertaining than correcting you. But today we operate in reality. And the reality is, Marcus, you co-signed every single one of Brad's fraudulent margin loans. You used your entire financial existence as collateral for a gambling addict playing dress-up on Wall Street. Zuri took another step forward. The security guards moved with her in perfect synchronization. Because I bought that debt, I am now your primary creditor. Do you understand what that means, Marcus? It means the bank did not freeze your accounts. I did. It means the bank is not seizing your assets. I am. Marcus began to tremble. A prominent wealthy man reduced to a shaking mess in the middle of a public lobby. He looked at the floor, his entire legacy evaporating before his eyes. I am the legal owner of the Buckhead Mansion, Zuri continued, her voice devoid of any mercy. I am the legal owner of the luxury SUV parked outside. I am the legal owner of your country club equity shares. And I am the legal owner of whatever pathetic fractions remain in your retirement fund. You handed the keys to your kingdom to a white man who exploited our culture simply because he made you feel close to wealth. Now a black woman you threw away owns every single piece of it. Kendra burst into loud, hysterical sobs, burying her face in her hands. Brad slid down the side of the turnstile, sitting on the marble floor with his head between his knees, completely defeated. But Valerie could not accept it. Her fragile, narcissistic ego violently rejected the reality of her total destruction. She could not process that the stepdaughter she had tormented for decades now held the power of a god over her life. Her brain snapped, searching for the only logical explanation her twisted mind could formulate to explain Zuri's immense wealth. Valerie lunged forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged hatred. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at Zuri's face. You stole it! Valerie screeched, her voice echoing wildly off the high glass ceilings. That is the only way! You stole your father's retirement money to start this shadow company. You are nothing but a thief. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic, unhinged energy. I simply stood there, letting the echo of her accusation bounce off the polished marble walls. A thief. The word was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from reality, that it barely registered as an insult. I raised my right hand, lifting 2 fingers just a fraction of an inch. From the periphery of the lobby, Elena, my executive assistant, stepped forward. She was dressed as immaculately as I was, moving with a quiet, lethal efficiency that commanded immediate respect. She carried a single, unassuming manila folder. She handed it to me without a single word, gave a curt nod, and stepped back into the shadows of the lobby. Valerie was panting, her chest heaving as she waited for me to explode. Marcus was staring at the folder, a sudden primal panic flashing behind his eyes. He recognized it. Even after 5 years, he recognized the exact shade of that heavy paper stock and the seal of the law firm embossed on the corner. I opened the folder slowly. The sound of the thick paper sliding against itself was the only noise in the vast, cavernous space. I reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a yellowed bank deposit receipt, dated exactly 5 years and 2 months ago. It was a physical record of the defining moment of my entire existence. I held it up, making sure the harsh lobby lighting illuminated the faded ink and the official bank stamp. "Let us talk about stolen money, Valerie," I said. My voice was dangerously soft, forcing everyone to strain to hear it. "Let us talk about who the real thieves in this family are. Because my initial capital did not come from your husband's retirement accounts. It came from a woman who knew exactly what kind of man Marcus Jenkins truly was. It came from my biological mother." Marcus flinched as if he had been physically struck. He took a staggering step backward, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. The arrogant patriarch from the country club was completely gone, replaced by a terrified man whose deepest, darkest secret was being dragged into the harsh light of day. For those who do not know the full family history, I continued my gaze sweeping over the terrified faces of my relatives. My biological mother passed away when I was a teenager. Before she died, she took out a secret, highly protected life insurance policy. She made absolutely certain that Marcus was not listed anywhere on the documentation. She named me as the sole, irrevocable beneficiary with the ironclad stipulation that the funds would only be released to me upon my 27th birthday. She knew that if Marcus had any access to that money, it would vanish instantly to fund his pathetic obsession with maintaining a fake image of wealth. Valerie opened her mouth to speak, to offer some kind of defense, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus, seeking validation, seeking reassurance that I was lying. But Marcus was staring intently at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. When I turned 27, I received the notification that the trust had matured. I said, taking a slow step closer to the group. The payout was exactly $50,000. It was not a massive fortune. But to a young woman who had been systematically emotionally abused and financially cut off by her own father, it was a lifeline. It was a chance to finally build a foundation. I looked directly into Marcus's terrified eyes. "But you found out about the payout, did you not, Marcus? You intercepted the bank notice in the mail. And what did you do? Did you congratulate your struggling daughter? Did you offer to help her invest it wisely to build a better future?" Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. He was shaking his head slowly, a pathetic, cowardly attempt to deny the reality I was exposing to the entire room. "No," I answered for him, my tone devoid of any mercy. "You cornered me in the kitchen of that massive Buckhead mansion. You brought your personal lawyer and a notary public. You tried to bully, manipulate, and legally coerce me into signing the entirety of that $50,000 over to you. And do you remember what you told me you needed the money for?" I turned my attention to Kendra. She was still clutching her silk robe, her tear-streaked face a portrait of utter devastation. "You told me that Kendra was turning 18 the following week," I said, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You told me that it was an essential family tradition to buy the youngest daughter a brand new Mercedes-Benz for her birthday. You looked me dead in the eye and demanded I hand over the only thing my dead mother ever gave me just so your golden child could have a luxury car to show off to her spoiled friends. You called me selfish for wanting to keep it. You told me I owed it to the family." Kendra gasped, taking a stumbling step away from her father. She had not known where the money for that car was supposed to come from. Or maybe she did, and she just did not care until this exact moment. I refused to sign the transfer. I stated the memory of that day fueling the steel in my posture. "That was the day you called me a failure. That was the day you told me I was no longer welcome in your home. You threw me out onto the street with nothing simply because I would not fund your favorite daughter's vanity project." I looked down at the yellowed receipt in my hand. "I walked out of your house with nothing but the clothes on my back, and this exact deposit slip. $50,000. That was my seed capital. I lived in a roach-infested apartment. I ate cheap ramen noodles for 3 years. I worked 20-hour days analyzing commercial debt portfolios, teaching myself the intricacies of corporate restructuring and hostile takeovers. I took that $50,000 and I used it to buy my first distressed asset. Then I flipped it, then I bought another, and another, and another. I took 2 measured steps toward Valerie. She shrank back, terrified of the proximity, realizing she was standing face to face with a predator she had helped create. I never touched a single cent of your husband's money, Valerie. I said, my tone absolute and unforgiving. I did not need to. I built this entire empire with the money he tried to steal from me. I let the yellowed receipt slip from my fingers. It fluttered through the air, drifting back and forth, before landing gently on the polished marble floor, resting right against the toe of Valerie's expensive designer shoe. I turned $50,000 into $27 million, I said, my voice echoing with devastating finality. What did your daughter turn her Mercedes into? A DUI. The silence that followed my question was absolute. Kendra buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, humiliated sobs. The DUI had been swept under the rug by Marcus's expensive lawyers, a dirty little secret they thought was safely buried. Exposing it here in the lobby of my own building stripped away the last remaining shred of their manufactured perfection. Valerie stared at the yellowed bank receipt on the marble floor, as if it were a venomous snake, completely immobilized by the gravity of her own defeat. Then the true coward of the family decided to make his move. Bradley Pierce stepped out from behind his weeping wife. His tailored suit was visibly damp under the arms, his face glistening with a nervous sweat that ruined his slick, polished aesthetic. He ran a hand over his slicked-back hair and forced a wide, painfully artificial smile. He swaggered forward, adjusting his stance in a pathetic attempt to look relaxed and in control. "Yo, Zuri, come on now, sis," Brad said, his voice dropping into a forced rhythmic cadence that made my stomach churn. He threw his hands up in a gesture of fake surrender. "We do not need to do all this. We family, let us keep this in-house, you feel me? No need to bring the feds or the lawyers into family business. You made your point. You got the bag. Respect. But we can work this out boss to boss. We can restructure the debt. Just give me a week to move some capital around and we are good." I did not blink. I did not move. I just looked at him. I looked at this mediocre, untalented man who had swindled my father out of his life savings simply because Marcus was too obsessed with the illusion of white corporate validation to check the actual financial statements. My gaze traveled slowly from his expensive sweat-stained collar down to his imported Italian loafers. The sheer audacity of his performance was staggering. He was standing in my lobby having just bankrupted my father, and he was trying to charm me by mimicking a culture he actively preyed upon. "My attorney is a white man just like you, Brad," I said, my voice slicing through his pathetic bravado like a scalpel. "But he actually works for a living instead of cosplaying as a culture he exploits." Brad's artificial smile vanished. He stopped swaggering. He froze, his hands awkwardly suspended in the air, the blood draining completely from his face. "You put on that accent. You use our slang and you pretend to be down with the culture because it makes you feel edgy." I continued, taking a deliberate step toward him. "You used it to make my father feel comfortable giving you his money. You played on his desperate need for proximity to your perceived status, and you wrapped it up in a neat little package of cultural appropriation. But underneath that forced dialect and those tailored suits, you are just a common thief. You are a parasite. Do not ever call me sis again. We are not family. You are just a bad investment I am currently liquidating." Brad opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words materialized. He looked back at Marcus for support, but Marcus was staring blankly at the floor, the realization of his monumental failure fully paralyzing him. Kendra grabbed Brad's arm, tugging him backward, finally understanding that her husband had zero power in this room. Valerie, however, refused to surrender gracefully. She gritted her teeth and glared at me. "Fine," She snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. You bought the debt. You proved your point. What do you want from us? You want us to grovel. You want us to beg for a payment plan. How much time do we have to pay you back before you start seizing our accounts? I tilted my head, looking at my stepmother with a serene, almost pitying expression. You are misunderstanding the situation, Valerie. I am not offering you a payment plan. I am not a bank extending a courtesy grace period to a valued client. I am a corporate liquidator, and you are currently occupying my assets. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sharp sound echoed crisply in the vast lobby. From the private alcove near the gold-plated elevator, David Sterling emerged. My lead attorney walked forward with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who held all the winning cards. He was flanked by two process servers carrying thick sealed manila envelopes. David did not look at Valerie or Kendra. He walked directly up to Marcus, who was visibly trembling, and signaled for the servers to step forward. The first process server extended a thick legal packet, pressing it directly against Marcus's chest until the older man reflexively took it. Marcus Jenkins and Valerie Jenkins. David said, his voice projecting clear, undeniable legal authority. You have been officially served. The properties listed as collateral under the Pierce Capital Margin Agreements are now the legal property of Obsidian Holdings, LLC. This includes the primary residence located in Buckhead, Atlanta. Marcus stared at the thick envelope in his hands as if it were a bomb. What is this? He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. What does this mean? I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. It means you are being evicted, Marcus, I said. Valerie let out a strangled gasp. Evicted? You cannot evict us. We have lived in that house for 15 years. Our clothes are there. My jewelry is there. You cannot just throw us out onto the street. The transfer of deed was finalized at 8 o'clock this morning, David explained, calmly adjusting his glasses. As the new legal owners of the property, Obsidian Holdings is executing its right to remove unauthorized occupants. I looked directly into my father's terrified, wide eyes. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate my property, I said, my tone absolute and completely devoid of emotion. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, a private security team will arrive at the Buckhead mansion. They will change the locks, secure the perimeter, and seize any assets left inside to cover the outstanding interest on your defaulted loans. You will pack whatever fits into your personal bags, and you will leave. 24 hours. Marcus breathed, his legs finally giving out. He stumbled backward, catching himself on the marble reception desk. Zuri, please, you cannot do this. Where are we supposed to go? We do not have any cash. The accounts are frozen. We cannot even book a hotel. That sounds like a personal problem, Marcus, I replied, turning my back on him. I hear Brad is a financial genius. I'm sure he can figure it out. I began walking back toward the gold-plated elevator, the heavy silence of my family's total destruction lingering in the air behind me. The elevator doors were just beginning to slide shut when a desperate, ragged voice echoed across the marble lobby. Wait. I turned slightly. Marcus had broken away from the process servers. The arrogant patriarch was entirely gone. He pushed past Valerie and rushed toward the security perimeter, his hands raised in a gesture of pure surrender. Zuri, please, give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes of your time privately. Let us go upstairs. Let us talk about this like a family behind closed doors. Do not do this to us down here in the lobby. I looked at his pleading eyes. I looked at Valerie, who was frantically nodding, desperate to escape the public humiliation of the ground floor. I looked at Brad, who was visibly shaking, and Kendra, who was staring at my security detail in mute horror. Letting them leave now would be too easy. I wanted them to see exactly how high I had climbed. I wanted them to feel the crushing weight of the altitude they could never reach. I raised a hand, signaling the guards to stand down. Bring them up to the penthouse boardroom, I instructed David. The ride up in the gold-plated elevator was suffocatingly silent. I stood at the front, my eyes fixed on the digital floor indicator as it rapidly climbed to the top of the skyscraper. Behind me, I could hear the ragged, uneven breathing of my family. Brad smelled of sour sweat and cheap cologne. Valerie was clutching her designer bag so tightly her knuckles were white. The doors glided open, revealing the crown jewel of Obsidian Holdings. The penthouse boardroom was a masterpiece of intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling glass wrapped around the entire room, offering a dizzying, unobstructed, 360-degree view of the Atlanta skyline. We were so high up that the rest of the city looked like a miniature model built for my amusement. In the center of the room sat a massive conference table carved from a single continuous slab of polished black obsidian stone. There were no plush chairs for guests, only sleek, rigid leather seats that offered zero comfort. I walked directly to the head of the table and took my seat. David stood silently by the heavy oak doors, crossing his arms. My family huddled at the opposite end of the room, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the power surrounding them. Marcus took a deep breath. The change of scenery seemed to grant him a false sense of security. Surrounded by the trappings of corporate wealth, he foolishly attempted to slip back into his role as the seasoned executive. He placed his hands on the cold stone table and puffed out his chest, trying to project authority. "Zuri, you have made your point." Marcus began dropping his voice into the deep resonant register he used when negotiating business deals. "You have proven you are successful. You have proven you are powerful. But what you are doing right now crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed." I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and said absolutely nothing. I let the silence hang in the air, forcing him to fill it. He took my silence as an invitation to continue. He began to pace at the end of the table, waving his hands as he launched into a highly rehearsed, manipulative monologue. "Think about what you are doing to our community, Zuri. I am an elder at our church. I sit on boards that fund scholarships for Black youth across this state. Do you have any idea what the Black elite of Atlanta will say when they hear you evicted your own father?" He pointed a finger at me, trying to weaponize the very culture he had spent his life trying to elevate himself above. "They will shun you. The country club, the alumni associations, the fraternities and sororities. They will look at you as a pariah. We are a prominent family. We have a reputation to uphold. You are tearing down our entire family legacy over a petty childhood grudge. You are destroying a pillar of the Black community." Valerie found her courage and chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate. "You are embarrassing us in front of everyone. How are we supposed to explain this to the pastor? How are we supposed to show our faces at the charity galas? You are ruining our lives for no reason." "It is selfish," Kendra whimpered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "You have all this money and you are just trying to hurt us because you are jealous of me and Brad." I did not interrupt them. I sat at the head of the obsidian table, perfectly still, letting Marcus exhaust every single manipulative tactic he had utilized since I was a little girl. I listened to him spin a narrative where he was the noble patriarch, and I was the bitter, ungrateful child, tearing down the community. I let him talk about respectability politics. I let him preach about the church. I let him drain his lungs until his voice grew hoarse and his pacing slowed to a halt. He finally stopped speaking. He looked at me, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. He thought he had reached me. He thought the heavy guilt of tearing down a prominent Black family would force me to back down, just as it had forced so many others in his circle to sweep their dirty secrets under the rug. The silence stretched for a full 60 seconds. The only sound in the room was the faint, muffled hum of the wind pressing against the reinforced glass windows. "Are you quite finished?" I asked. My voice was a soft, deadly calm that instantly shattered his hopeful illusion. Marcus blinked, his shoulders slumping. "Zuri, I am trying to save our family name." "You do not care about the family name, Marcus," I stated, dropping my hands flat onto the polished black stone. "You care about the optics. You stand in front of me preaching about the Black elite and community solidarity. Yet you gladly allowed your wife to order security to drag your Black daughter out of a country club just to impress a white son-in-law. You handed your entire financial portfolio, the very legacy you are crying about right now, to a mediocre white man simply because he wore a nice suit and threw around a few slang words to make you feel cool." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, But I raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. "You did not build a legacy," I told him, my eyes locking onto his terrified face. "You built a house of cards, and you handed the keys to a degenerate." I leaned forward, reaching out to the sleek control console embedded in the desk. I tapped a single illuminated button. The massive glass wall behind me instantly darkened, transforming from a transparent window into a state-of-the-art presentation screen. The Obsidian Holdings logo flashed briefly before pulling up a highly classified financial interface. "Let us talk about the legacy you entrusted to your brilliant son-in-law, Marcus." The massive screen behind me hummed with a low electric vibration, casting a stark white glow over the polished black stone of the conference table. But I did not turn to look at it. I kept my eyes entirely locked on my father. He was sweating now. The pristine, unbothered facade of the country club patriarch was melting away, revealing the terrified, hollow man underneath. "You stood on that stage last night and delivered a passionate speech about Black excellence," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room with surgical precision. "You looked out at a sea of wealthy, influential people and proudly declared that you were building a dynasty. You preach about community solidarity. You sit on the board of the church and pass the collection plate. You demand respect from everyone you meet because you possess a degree from Morehouse and a country club membership." I took a slow, deliberate step away from my chair, walking down the length of the obsidian table. Marcus tracked my movements, his eyes wide, his breathing shallow. "Yet when push came to shove, your entire ideology was nothing but a cheap costume," I continued. "You paraded around that ballroom, desperate for the validation of the white gaze. You wanted so badly to be accepted by the very people who built their wealth excluding men exactly like you. And to secure your place in that world, you handed the keys to your financial kingdom to a man whose only qualification was the color of his skin and his ability to wear a tuxedo." Marcus opened his mouth, his jaw working silently, but I did not give him a millimeter of space to speak. "When your black daughter stood in front of you, a woman who built an empire entirely on her own merit, you looked away." I reminded him, the memory of his betrayal fueling the absolute coldness in my tone. "You allowed your vain, insecure wife to order security to throw me out of a public venue. You let them treat your own flesh and blood like a trespasser. And why? Because my presence threatened the fragile ego of the white man you were so desperate to impress. You threw me out, Marcus, to protect him." "That is not fair!" Marcus finally choked out, his voice cracking violently. His hands gripped the edge of the stone table so hard his knuckles turned white. "You do not understand the pressure. You do not understand how the financial markets operate. Brad is a professional. He manages a high-yield, aggressive growth fund. The market is volatile, Zuri. You work in debt, so you only see the worst-case scenarios. But wealth management requires taking massive risks." Marcus was defaulting to his corporate training. He was desperately clinging to the financial jargon because it was the only language that made him feel safe. He was trying to rationalize his total destruction by framing it as a standard business cycle. "The economy took a severe downturn last quarter," Marcus pleaded, his eyes darting frantically toward Brad, who was currently pressing himself flat against the glass wall of the boardroom as if trying to merge with the architecture. "It was a liquidity crisis. Brad is aggressive, yes. Maybe he leveraged a little too much capital against the real estate equity. But that is how hedge funds operate. You weather the storm. It was just a bad market call, Zuri. A severe correction. We just need a bridge loan to cover the margin spread until the market rebounds." Kendra jumped in, emboldened by her father's desperate rationalization. She wiped her tear-streaked face and glared at me. "Daddy is right. Brad works on Wall Street. He knows exactly what he is doing. Everyone has bad quarters. You are just using a temporary dip in the market to steal our house and punish us because you are bitter." I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still in the center of the boardroom. I looked at Kendra fiercely, defending the man who had just vaporized her entire existence. Then I looked at Marcus, the seasoned chief financial officer, blindly clinging to the illusion that he had simply been the victim of a bearish economy. And then I laughed. It was not a chuckle. It was not a polite corporate scoff. It was a cold, dark, terrifying sound that erupted from deep within my chest. The laugh echoed sharply off the glass walls, and the stone floor filling the massive penthouse boardroom with a chilling, predatory energy. The sound of my laughter instantly paralyzed the room. Marcus stopped breathing. Valerie flinched, shrinking back into her leather chair. Kendra's defiant expression crumbled into pure, unadulterated terror. Even my attorney David subtly adjusted his stance, recognizing that the final execution was about to commence. I let the laugh die down, replacing it with a stare so devoid of mercy that Marcus physically shuddered. "A bad market call," I repeated, tilting my head as I studied the pathetic man who donated his life savings to a fraud. A bad market call is misjudging the quarterly earnings of a tech startup. A bad market call is a poorly timed short squeeze on a volatile stock. A bad market call is buying commercial real estate right before a zoning change. I walked directly up to Marcus, stopping mere inches from where he sat, trembling. I slammed both of my hands flat onto the table, leaning in so close he could feel the cold radiating off me. Brad didn't make a bad market call, Marcus. Brad doesn't even have a brokerage license. The absolute impossibility of my statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, as his brain desperately tried to reject the truth. He looked at Brad, waiting for his golden son-in-law to laugh, to produce a federal registration card, to do absolutely anything to prove me wrong. Brad did nothing. He was plastered against the glass wall of the boardroom, wiping beads of sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors. I stepped back from the table and pulled a sleek remote from my blazer pocket. I pressed a single button. The massive glass wall behind me flared to life, casting a harsh, clinical light over the terrified faces of my family. I had tasked my corporate acquisitions team to tear apart the financial architecture of Pierce Capital, and what they found was not a hedge fund. It was a digital crime scene. "First, let us address the credentials of your financial genius," I said, my voice projecting across the vast room with absolute authority. The screen displayed the official federal database for licensed financial brokers. I typed in Bradley Pierce. 0 results found. I typed in Pierce Capital. 0 registered entities under federal oversight. The man you trusted with your entire life savings, the man you praised on a stage just last night, is legally not allowed to trade a single stock on behalf of a client. He is a ghost in the financial sector. Marcus gripped the edge of the Obsidian table. "That is a mistake," he choked out, his voice cracking. "He showed me the prospectuses. He showed me the quarterly returns. We invested heavily in luxury real estate developments across the Florida coast. Premium commercial properties. I saw the architectural renderings myself." "You saw exactly what he wanted you to see," I corrected smoothly. I clicked the remote again. The massive screen split in half. On the left side, a glossy, high-resolution architectural rendering appeared. It showed a towering, modern luxury condominium complex in Miami, complete with infinity pools, valet parking, and sleek glass balconies overlooking the ocean. "This was the brochure Brad handed you in your country club dining room, correct?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The Pierce Capital Crown Jewel Project. You wired his firm $3 million from your primary retirement account for this specific development." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes glued to the screen. I clicked the remote one more time. The right side of the screen updated. It displayed a high-definition satellite image pulled directly from the county property appraiser's office, dated yesterday afternoon. There were no infinity pools. There were no glass towers. There was absolutely nothing but a massive, overgrown dirt lot filled with standing water and illegal dumping. "Your $3 million bought a toxic swamp, Marcus," I stated, letting the devastating image burn into his retinas. "The land is zoned for agricultural use. It does not even have commercial permits. You cannot build a tool shed on that property, let alone a luxury condominium." Kendra let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She turned to look at her husband. Her heavy makeup was smeared from crying, but the shock on her face was entirely genuine. "Brad," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "Brad, what is that? Where is the building? You told my dad the construction was ahead of schedule." Brad did not answer her. He was breathing heavily, taking a tiny, calculated step toward the boardroom doors, testing his escape route. My attorney David simply shifted his weight, stepping squarely in front of the exit. Brad was completely trapped in the room, with the very people he had financially slaughtered. I was not finished. I clicked the remote, rapidly flashing document after document across the massive screen, delivering blow after blow to my father's shattered ego. "Let us look at the Tampa commercial high-rises," I said, my voice echoing like a judge delivering a final sentence. "You wired another $2 million for that project." The screen showed a condemned abandoned strip mall with a collapsed roof. "Let us examine the exclusive gated community in Orlando." The screen updated to show a patch of barren dirt bordering a noisy, polluted highway. Every single prospectus Brad handed you was a cheap fabrication downloaded from the internet. I paced the length of the table, making sure my father heard every single syllable. He created fake limited liability companies. He printed fake quarterly return statements on expensive cardstock. He used your desperate need to be part of the elite financial class against you. You were so eager to boast to your friends about having a Wall Street son-in-law that you never bothered to run a basic background check. You bypassed every single protocol you learned in your 30-year corporate career because Brad fed your massive ego. Marcus looked like a man who was actively having a heart attack. He clutched his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. The realization was physically crushing him. His legacy, his wealth, his entire identity had been dismantled by a man who could not even afford a real office space. Valerie was hyperventilating, staring at the dirt lots on the screen, finally understanding that her designer shoes and country club brunches were funded by absolutely nothing. "You wired him over $12 million in total capital over the last 2 years," I stated, bringing the financial summaries up on the screen. The numbers glowed in harsh, unforgiving red font. But as we can clearly see, that money was not used to purchase real estate. It was not used to build luxury condos. The properties Pierce Capital actually owns are worth less than $50,000 combined. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still at the head of the Obsidian table, commanding the absolute attention of the room. I looked at Marcus, then at Kendra, and finally locked my eyes directly onto Brad, who looked like he was about to be physically sick. I switched the slide on the screen, bringing up a highly complex web of offshore wire transfers. "If the money did not go into real estate, Marcus, where do you think your retirement went?" The massive screen blinked, replacing the images of swampy dirt lots with a sprawling, chaotic web of digital routing numbers and international bank insignias. I watched my father's eyes dart across the screen, trying to make sense of the cascading data. Red lines traced the movement of his wealth, charting a terrifying journey away from his control and into a financial abyss. I clicked the remote, isolating a specific cluster of transactions. "Here's the life cycle of your retirement fund, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "You authorized wire transfers to Pierce Capital, believing the funds were entering a secure escrow account for commercial development. But Pierce Capital did not hold that money for even 24 hours. Brad set up an automated sweep. The second your cash cleared, it was immediately routed to a shell corporation called Apex Ventures, registered in the Cayman Islands." Marcus stared at the offshore routing numbers. "The Cayman Islands," he repeated, his voice barely a hollow rasp. "Why would he send domestic real estate capital to the Caymans?" "Because offshore accounts do not report to the Internal Revenue Service with the same urgency as domestic banks," I explained, stepping closer to the screen. "It creates a dark zone, a place where money goes to be washed. But Brad is not a sophisticated money launderer. He is actually quite sloppy. He left a digital trail a mile wide because he was operating in a state of pure, unadulterated panic." I clicked the remote again. The map on the screen zoomed out, tracing the red lines from the Caribbean across the globe. The lines terminated at 2 very specific locations: Las Vegas, Nevada, and Macau, China. Valerie stopped crying. She looked up, her tear-streaked makeup giving her the appearance of a cracked porcelain doll. "Macau," she whispered. "What is in Macau?" "Casinos," Valerie Twy answered, letting the weight of the word crush whatever hope they had left. the biggest, most exclusive high-stakes casinos on the planet. I brought up a new document on the screen. It was a staggering list of withdrawal receipts and casino credit markers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars withdrawn in single transactions. $500,000 wired directly to a VIP cage at the Bellagio. $1.2 million transferred to a holding account at the Venetian in Macau. Brad did not build you a real estate portfolio, Marcus. Brad built a mountain of chips at the baccarat tables. I pointed a finger at the cowering man pressed against the boardroom window. Your brilliant son-in-law is not a Wall Street prodigy. He is a degenerate gambling addict. Kendra let out a primal, gut-wrenching scream. She lunged at Brad, pounding her fists against his chest. You liar! You told me you were working late. You told me you were flying to Asia to meet with property developers. You were at the casino. You lost our money. You lost my father's money. Brad did not even try to defend himself. He just raised his arms to shield his face, refusing to look at his wife. He knew it was over. But he did not just lose your money, Kendra, I interjected, ensuring my voice cut through her hysterical sobbing. That would imply he simply had a string of bad luck. The reality is far more sinister. Brad owed money long before he ever set foot in the Grand Oak Country Club. I pulled up a background report compiled by my corporate security team. I projected it right next to the casino receipts. Bradley Pierce was fired from a low-level entry-tier data entry job at a minor brokerage firm. 6 years ago, I stated, reading the undeniable facts into the record. He never held a Series 7 license. He was fired for embezzling petty cash to cover his sports betting debts. But his addiction did not stop there. He moved on to high-stakes tables, borrowing capital from private lenders, unregulated lenders, dangerous people who do not care about your country club status when they come to collect. Marcus looked like he was suffocating. He gripped the collar of his shirt, pulling at his tie as if it were a noose. He lied, Marcus gasped, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. He gave me dividend checks last year. He showed me the returns. The money was real. It was a Ponzi scheme, Marcus, I said, shaking my head at his absolute financial blindness. It is the oldest trick in the book. He took the $2 million you gave him in January, and he paid you back $200,000 in March, calling it a quarterly dividend. He used your own money to pay you a fake return just to keep the hook set deep in your mouth. He needed you to trust him so you would hand over the rest of the accounts. And you fell for it completely. But why me? Marcus asked, his voice breaking. Why did he target this family? I looked at Brad, then turned my gaze back to my father. Because you were the perfect mark. You were a wealthy, status-obsessed black man desperate to validate your elite standing. You wanted a white son-in-law with a Wall Street pedigree so badly that you completely ignored your own corporate instincts. You blinded yourself to every red flag because having him at your dinner table made you feel like you had finally arrived. I walked slowly toward the end of the table, standing directly in front of Marcus. He could not look away from the screen. He could not look away from the millions of dollars he had amassed over 30 years of corporate grinding, all of it funneled into slot machines, poker tables, and the pockets of loan sharks. Brad needed clean credit. I continued, my tone devoid of any sympathy. He needed a pristine financial reputation to bypass the fraud alerts. You gave him your power of attorney. You gave him your signature. You co-signed the margin loans, putting your own name on the line so he could borrow millions more from the central bank. You built a fortress of respectability over 30 years. Marcus and you handed the master key to a con artist just to spite the daughter who actually possessed the talent you worshipped. Marcus stared at the ground. His hands fell to his sides. The reality of his utter ruin had finally crushed the last remaining pillar of his ego. He had nothing left. No money, no mansion, no legacy, and no one to blame but himself. You handed him the keys to your kingdom because he looked the part, Zuri states, and he sold your kingdom for casino chips. For a fraction of a second, the room was suspended in an agonizing silence. The digital glow of the offshore transactions painted my family's faces in harsh, unforgiving light. The reality of their total annihilation had finally pierced through decades of arrogance and delusion. Then the illusion shattered completely. Marcus let out a visceral roar. It was a terrifying, guttural sound, the sound of a man watching his entire legacy vaporize in real time. He did not yell, he did not posture, he simply snapped. He launched himself across the polished expanse of the obsidian table with a speed and ferocity that defied his age. Brad let out a pathetic shriek, but he had nowhere to go. His back was already pressed flat against the glass wall. Marcus cleared the table, his hands outstretched and slammed directly into Brad. The impact sent a violent shudder through the reinforced glass. Marcus's hands closed around Brad's throat, pinning him in place. "You stole everything," Marcus screamed, spittle flying from his lips as he tightened his grip. "My house, my retirement, my reputation, you filthy lying parasite. I gave you my daughter. I gave you my name. I will kill you. I will end you right here." Brad gagged, his hands frantically clawing at Marcus's wrists. He kicked out wildly, trying to find leverage, but the older man was fueled by pure, unadulterated adrenaline and the crushing weight of utter ruin. Brad's face began to turn a mottled shade of red, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as he gasped for air. Kendra began screaming hysterically. She scrambled around the edge of the table, grabbing at her father's shoulders, trying to pull him off her husband. "Daddy, stop. You are hurting him. Please, Daddy, let him go. We can fix this. He said he could fix it." "There is no fixing this," Kendra Marcus roared, shoving her away without breaking his grip on Brad's neck. "He lost $12 million in Macau. It is gone. We are finished." While the patriarch of the family attempted to strangle his golden son-in-law against the boardroom window, Valerie completely broke down. The manicured, composed society wife who had tried to have me thrown out of a country club just hours prior completely disintegrated. Her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees on the hard stone floor, the sound echoing sharply in the chaotic room. She did not crawl toward her husband. She did not crawl toward her daughter. Valerie crawled toward my chair. Valerie sobbed, her hands reaching out to grasp the hem of my trousers. "Please, I am begging you. You have $27 million. You can stop this. You can pay off the margin call. You can inject cash into the accounts. We will pay you back. We will give you equity in the house. We will do anything." She looked up at me, mascara running down her face in thick black streaks. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her dignity entirely stripped away. "You cannot let the bank take the house, Zuri. Please. The country club board members will find out. The church will find out. The entire community will know we are bankrupt. We will be ruined. We will be laughingstocks. Please, you have to save us. You are the only one who can save us." I did not move. I did not pull my leg away from her grasping hands. I simply looked down at the woman who had spent over a decade making me feel like a worthless burden. The woman who had proudly called me a frigid failure less than 24 hours ago. She was not begging for her husband's life. She was not begging for her family's safety. Zuri Jenkins was on her knees crying over the loss of her social status. David, my attorney, had already stepped forward when the violence erupted. He was holding his phone ready to dial emergency services, his eyes locked on Marcus, who was still choking the life out of Brad against the glass. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice over the screaming and the chaos. I calmly reached forward and pressed the sleek intercom button embedded in my desk. "Security," I said, my voice echoing evenly into the communication channel. "There is an altercation in the penthouse boardroom. Escort these 4 individuals out of my building, permanently." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open before Marcus could inflict any permanent damage. 6 members of my elite security detail poured into the room with tactical, silent precision. 2 of the massive guards instantly grabbed Marcus by the shoulders. They pried his hands off Brad's neck with effortless strength and pinned his arms firmly behind his back. Marcus thrashed his dress shoes, slipping on the polished stone floor, but he was completely immobilized. Brad slumped against the glass window, sliding down to the floor. He was gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat, his face a blotchy, terrified red. Another pair of guards hauled him roughly to his feet by the armpits of his cheap tuxedo. Valerie was still sobbing on the floor near my chair. I did not look down at her. I simply nodded to Elena. My assistant stepped forward, gripped my stepmother firmly by the elbow, and forced her to stand. Kendra was paralyzed, her hands covering her mouth, letting out high-pitched, panicked breaths. Take them to the ground floor, I instructed the lead guard. Hold them in the retention area until the authorities arrive. Marcus just assaulted a man in my building. We follow protocol. The guards marched my family toward the gold elevator. Marcus stopped fighting. The adrenaline left his body, leaving behind an empty, broken shell of a man. Valerie stumbled in her designer heels, weeping loudly. The heavy brushed metal doors closed on their ruined faces, swallowing them whole. I turned back to the glass window, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. It was barely 10 o'clock in the morning. I smoothed the front of my blazer and looked at David. Make the call to the regional director, I said. It is time to drop the hammer. I had not just bought my family's distressed debt to evict them. I was a corporate liquidator, and I always maximized my returns. Over the past 48 hours, my forensic accounting team had compiled a devastating 100-page dossier on Bradley Pierce. We documented every fraudulent offshore transfer, every unregistered trade, and every massive casino withdrawal. I had forwarded the entire encrypted file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI White-Collar Crime Division before the retirement gala even started. The afternoon hours passed with the quiet, efficient hum of absolute victory. I sat at my desk reviewing the acquisition paperwork, legally transferring the Buckhead mansion and the luxury vehicles into Obsidian Holdings' corporate portfolio. By 4 o'clock, Elena knocked gently on my office door. She did not say a word. She simply picked up the remote and turned on the massive flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. She switched the input to the premier financial news network. The breaking news banner crawled across the bottom of the screen in bright, flashing red letters. Pierce Capital insolvent. Massive fraud investigation launched. I leaned back in my leather chair, steeping my fingers. The news anchor was speaking rapidly, detailing a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme that had just collapsed in the heart of Atlanta. But it was the live helicopter footage that made me smile. The network was broadcasting a live raid. It was not a sleek Wall Street high-rise. It was a tiny, dilapidated strip mall office space in a forgotten suburban office park. A cheap vinyl banner reading Pierce Capital hung crookedly above a dirty glass door. Federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in bright yellow letters were hauling cardboard boxes of documents and computer servers out to waiting black vans. The anchor announced that the SEC had officially frozen all associated assets, both domestic and international. The Cayman Islands accounts had been seized. The casino credit lines were locked down by federal mandate. Brad Pierce had $0 to his name. Down in the lobby of my building, the same broadcast was playing on the massive screens mounted near the security turnstiles. My security team had detained Marcus, Valerie, Kendra, and Brad in the waiting area. They were forced to stand there, surrounded by my employees, and watch Brad's entire criminal enterprise be dismantled on national television. Marcus had to watch the cheap strip mall office flash across the screen, realizing that this was the prestigious firm he had dumped his entire life savings into. I took the private elevator down to the lobby to watch the finale. By the time the gold doors opened, flashing red and blue lights were illuminating the glass facade of my building. Atlanta police cruisers and 2 unmarked black SUVs had pulled up to the curb. Federal agents stepped out onto the pavement. They had tracked Brad's location using the cell phone signal from the frantic, desperate calls he had been trying to make to his offshore brokers. My lead security guard grabbed Brad by the back of his collar. He pushed the fraudster through the revolving glass doors, marching him right out onto the bustling Atlanta sidewalk. The federal agents swarmed him immediately. They slammed Brad against the hood of a police cruiser. He did not fight back. He just sobbed loudly as they patted him down and wrenched his arms behind his back. The metallic, heavy click of handcuffs echoed sharply over the street noise. Kendra had been pushed out through the doors right behind him alongside Marcus and Valerie. They stood on the concrete, the cool afternoon wind whipping around them, watching the golden boy of the family get read his Miranda rights. Brad twisted his head, looking wildly around the sidewalk, tears streaming down his face. He spotted Kendra standing near the entrance. "Kendra!" Brad screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Kendra! Call my lawyer! Call your dad! Tell them we need the trust fund to post bail. Do not leave me here. Kendra, please." Kendra stood completely still. She looked at the federal agents. She looked at the handcuffs. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and looked at her frozen bank accounts. There was no trust fund. There was no daddy's money. There was nothing but debt and federal prison. Kendra did not run toward her husband. She turned around, grabbed the hem of her silk robe, and sprinted in the exact opposite direction down the crowded Atlanta sidewalk, leaving him completely alone. While Kendra stood freezing on the wet pavement outside my empire, her parents were preparing for their own desperate final stand across town. Marcus and Valerie had spent the entire week living in a state of absolute toxic denial. Despite the frozen bank accounts, the looming eviction notices, and the constant loop of federal raids playing on the news, they refused to accept that their reign over Atlanta high society was over. They believed that their social capital could somehow override their financial ruin. They believed that if they just put on their best clothes and smiled hard enough, their wealthy friends would rush in to save them. Sunday morning arrived, bringing with it the most important social event of their week: the Grand Oak Country Club Sunday Brunch. It was the ultimate gathering space for the Black elite of the city. For 15 years, Marcus and Valerie had held court at a premium table near the center of the dining room. It was where deals were made, gossip was traded, and status was solidified. Marcus put on his finest tailored suit, meticulously adjusting his silk tie to hide the slight tremor in his hands. Valerie spent 2 hours applying her makeup layering foundation to cover the dark circles of sleepless nights and slipped into a vintage Chanel dress. They could not use their luxury vehicles because my repossession teams had already towed them away from the Buckhead Mansion driveway. Instead, they were forced to order a standard rideshare using a prepaid debit card Valerie had found at the bottom of a drawer. To preserve their fragile egos, Marcus made the driver drop them off 2 blocks away from the country club entrance. They walked the rest of the way in the humid morning heat, desperate to ensure no one saw them arriving in a beat-up sedan. They walked up the grand driveway, stepping onto the exact same portico where my Maybach had arrived just a short time ago. Marcus puffed out his chest, plastering a wide, artificial smile on his face. Valerie linked her arm through his, lifting her chin high. They pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the lavish, sunlit dining room. The room smelled of roasted carving stations, fresh lilies, and expensive perfume. The gentle clinking of crystal mimosa glasses and the low hum of sophisticated conversation filled the air. Marcus and Valerie stepped confidently into the foyer, waiting for the usual chorus of greetings from the hostesses and the warm waves from their peers. Instead, a chilling, absolute silence washed over the room. It did not happen all at once, but it spread like a virus. One table noticed them, the conversation dying instantly. Then the next table turned, then the next. Within 30 seconds, the lively Sunday brunch had transformed into a silent, staring gallery. Every single eye in the dining room was locked onto Marcus and Valerie. But there was no warmth in those eyes. There was no respect. There was only morbid curiosity, pity, and profound disgust. Everyone had seen the news. Everyone knew that Bradley Pierce was sitting in a federal holding cell. Everyone knew that Marcus Jenkins had bankrupted his family by handing his portfolio to a con artist. Valerie's fake smile began to twitch. She spotted her closest friend, a woman she had vacationed with in Paris just last summer, sitting at a window table. Valerie raised her hand to wave. The woman looked directly at Valerie, picked up her champagne flute, and deliberately turned her back, continuing her conversation with the person next to her. Marcus swallowed hard, feeling the crushing weight of the room's judgment. He spotted Judge Harrison, a prominent figure in their social circle, sitting near the carving station. Marcus forced a chuckle and walked toward the table, extending his right hand. "Harrison, good to see you, Marcus," said his voice booming, artificially loud in the quiet room. "We need to catch up. I have a business proposition for you, a bridge loan opportunity with massive returns." Judge Harrison did not stand up. He did not take Marcus's hand. He looked at the disgraced executive with a mixture of anger and contempt. "Marcus, you need to turn around and walk out of here," Harrison said, his voice low and completely devoid of warmth. "You brought the FBI to our doorsteps. You vouched for a criminal who scammed our community. You are a liability, and you are no longer welcome at this table." Marcus's hand dropped to his side. The color drained entirely from his face. Before he could formulate a response, a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped smoothly between Marcus and the judge. It was the general manager of the country club, flanked by two massive, unsmiling security guards. "Mr. Jenkins," Mrs. Jenkins, the manager said. His tone was perfectly polite, but carried the undeniable edge of a direct order. "I must ask you to step into the foyer immediately." Marcus bristled, his wounded ego flaring up in a final pathetic defense mechanism. "I am a premium member of this club. I have held a table here for 15 years. I am going to sit down and eat my brunch." The manager did not move a single inch. "Sir, the board of directors held an emergency session late last night. Your membership has been immediately and permanently revoked." Valerie let out a loud, theatrical gasp, clutching the pearls at her neck. "Revoked? On what grounds? We are pillars of this community. We donate to the charity galas. You cannot do this to us. Your financial accounts are frozen." Mrs. Jenkins, the manager, stated, ensuring his voice carried just enough for the front tables to hear the absolute truth. "The automatic draft for your monthly membership dues was declined by your bank yesterday afternoon. Furthermore, the bylaws of this institution strictly prohibit membership for individuals currently implicated in federal financial fraud investigations. The board has deemed your continued presence a severe reputational risk to the club and its members." Marcus turned a deep shade of crimson. He pointed a shaking finger at the manager. "I am the victim here. My son-in-law deceived me. I am a Morehouse man. I demand to speak to the board president right now." "The board president is the one who personally signed your expulsion papers this morning, Marcus," the manager replied coldly. "Now I must ask you to leave the premises voluntarily. If you refuse, these gentlemen will be forced to physically remove you." Valerie looked wildly around the dining room. The women who used to hang on to her every word, the socialites who used to envy her jewelry and her home, were now looking at her like she was a stray dog that had wandered indoors. She saw cell phones being discreetly raised, camera lenses pointed directly at her humiliation. The illusion was completely shattered. She was not a queen. She was a bankrupt outcast. The two security guards stepped forward simultaneously. They placed their large, heavy hands firmly on the elbows of Marcus and Valerie. It was not a gentle touch. It was a forceful, unyielding grip that commanded them to move. They were guided backward, stumbling slightly in their expensive shoes. They were marched directly through the grand ballroom, paraded in front of the very people they had spent their entire lives trying to impress. The walk of shame was agonizingly slow. They walked past the exact spot where Marcus had stood on the stage and delivered his arrogant retirement speech. They walked past the exact cocktail table where I had left the black envelope containing the financial warning, the warning he was too proud to open. They reached the heavy oak doors at the entrance of the ballroom. It was the exact spot where Valerie had stood just weeks prior, the exact spot where she had sneered and signaled security to remove her useless daughter from the premises. The manager opened the heavy doors, and the security guards shoved Marcus and Valerie out onto the concrete portico. The doors slammed shut behind them, locking with a heavy final thud. They stood alone in the humid Atlanta heat, completely stripped of their wealth, their status, and their pride. The 24-hour eviction notice I had served them in my lobby was ticking down relentlessly. They spent the entire night frantically tearing through their massive Buckhead estate, trying to figure out what fragments of their luxurious life they could salvage. Because their accounts were frozen, they could not hire premium white glove movers to carefully pack their crystal and fine art. Marcus had to walk 3 miles to a local hardware store just to buy cheap cardboard boxes and industrial black trash bags with the last bit of cash he had in his wallet. At exactly 9 o'clock the following morning, the reality of my hostile takeover arrived at their front gates. My private security team pulled up in 3 unmarked black SUVs, accompanied by 2 armed deputies from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department. The deputies approached the heavy oak front doors of the mansion and pounded on the wood. Marcus opened the door looking completely haggard. He had not slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his posture completely defeated. The deputies handed him the final foreclosure execution order. Time was up. My security team stepped inside the grand foyer. The lead guard informed Marcus and Valerie that they had exactly 60 minutes to load their rented vehicle and vacate the premises. Any assets left behind would be seized, cataloged, and liquidated to cover the outstanding interest on their defaulted margin loans. Valerie broke down sobbing as she dragged heavy black trash bags filled with designer clothes down the sweeping grand staircase. The bags snagged on the banister and ripped open, spilling expensive silk dresses and cashmere sweaters onto the hardwood floors. Marcus, a man who used to pay people to carry his golf clubs, was forced to haul cardboard boxes out to the driveway, sweating profusely under the cold, critical gaze of my security detail. They had rented a small, battered U-Haul truck with the last remaining funds on a prepaid grocery card. Marcus struggled to lift a heavy box of financial awards and framed corporate degrees into the back of the truck. He looked around the pristine, gated neighborhood, noticing the curtains twitching in the windows of the neighboring mansions. The wealthy peers he had spent years trying to impress were now actively watching his disgraceful eviction from the safety of their living rooms. At 10 o'clock sharp, the security guards escorted Marcus and Valerie down the long, winding driveway. The heavy wrought iron gates of the Buckhead estate swung shut and locked automatically. They were officially homeless. Marcus drove the rattling U-Haul out of the affluent suburbs, gripping the steering wheel in silence as they headed toward the industrial outskirts of the city. Without pristine credit or a verifiable income, they had been forced to sign a lease on a cramped, poorly maintained 2-bedroom apartment using a fake reference from a desperate acquaintance. The scenery outside the truck window shifted from lush, manicured lawns to cracked pavement chain-link fences and neon liquor store signs. When they unlocked the door to their new reality, the smell of old carpets and stale cigarette smoke hit them instantly. The apartment was tiny. The entire living space was smaller than the walk-in closet Valerie used to occupy. The walls were painted a dull institutional beige. The kitchen counter was chipped laminate and a single flickering fluorescent bulb illuminated the cramped space. Valerie dropped her trash bags on the stained carpet and sank to the floor, weeping uncontrollably. She looked at the peeling paint and the cheap linoleum, listening to the wail of police sirens echoing down the street outside. She finally realized that there was no bridge loan coming to save them. The kingdom was permanently gone. Marcus did not comfort his wife. He was completely hollowed out. He began mechanically opening the cheap cardboard boxes he had managed to salvage from his home office, blindly searching for anything that might offer a glimmer of hope or a path forward. He reached into a box filled with old tax documents and desk accessories. His fingers brushed against something smooth and heavy. He pulled it out. It was the sleek black envelope, the exact same envelope I had placed on the cocktail table at his retirement gala just 2 weeks prior. The envelope Valerie had slapped away, calling it a cheap plea for a handout. In his frantic rush to pack his office the night before, Marcus must have swept it off his desk into a box without realizing what it was. Marcus stared at the black envelope. His hands began to shake violently. He slid his thumb under the heavy wax seal and popped it open. He pulled out a thick stack of documents printed on premium paper. It was not a handmade card. It was not a plea for money. It was a comprehensive, devastatingly precise forensic financial audit of Pierce Capital. Marcus read the first page. It detailed the exact offshore routing numbers Brad had set up in the Cayman Islands. He frantically flipped to the second page. It listed the massive casino withdrawals in Macau, complete with timestamps and credit marker authorizations. The third page outlined the imminent margin call that would inevitably trigger the collapse of his entire estate. At the very top of the dossier, printed in bold red ink, was a date. The audit had been completed and verified an entire month before his retirement party. Attached to the front of the financial report was a single handwritten note on my personal corporate stationery. Marcus read the words, his breath hitching painfully in his chest, as the reality of his own arrogance crushed him. The note read, Marcus, your son-in-law is not investing your money. He is stealing it. Read these files immediately. If you sever your financial ties with Pierce Capital before the end of the quarter, you can salvage your retirement and save your home. Do not let your pride blind you to the truth. Zuri. Marcus dropped the papers. They scattered across the cheap-stained carpet of the tiny apartment. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest as a wave of absolute soul-crushing agony washed over him. The truth was not just that he had been conned by a fraud. The devastating truth was that his estranged, discarded daughter had tried to save his life. She had handed him the exact blueprint to protect his wealth, his legacy, and his home. If he had just opened the envelope instead of letting his wife insult me, if he had just shown me a fraction of the respect he blindly handed to a white con artist, if he had just looked past his own suffocating arrogance for one single minute, he could have saved everything. He had held his own salvation in his hands, and he had thrown it away because he was too proud to accept a gift from a daughter he deemed useless. Marcus remained on his knees in the cramped living room, the rough fibers of the cheap carpet digging through his slacks. The pages of the financial audit lay scattered around him like the debris of a plane crash. His breathing came in short, jagged gasps. The air in the apartment was heavy, smelling of stale grease and damp drywall, but Marcus could not take a full breath. The crushing weight of his own arrogance was suffocating him. Valerie walked out of the tiny, poorly lit bathroom. She was wearing a faded silk robe holding a cheap plastic hairbrush. She stopped dead when she saw her husband collapsed on the floor, clutching his chest. She dropped the brush and rushed over, her voice shrill with panic. Marcus, what is it? Are you having a heart attack? What is wrong with you? He could not speak. He could only raise a trembling hand and point a single finger at the papers scattered across the floor. Valerie reached down and snatched the top page. She read the bold red date. She read the detailed summary of Bradley Pierce's offshore accounts. Then she found the handwritten note on the heavy corporate stationery. Valerie read the words out loud, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper as she reached the end. She dropped the paper as if it had burned her fingers. She stumbled backward, her back hitting the peeling paint of the apartment wall. The memory of the retirement gala flashed behind her eyes. She remembered slapping that exact black envelope out of Zuri's hand. She remembered sneering at her stepdaughter, mocking her for bringing a cheap gift and ordering security to throw her out into the street. "We had it!" Valerie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. "We had the warning. We could have pulled the funds. We could have saved the house. I threw it away. I threw our entire life away." Marcus did not comfort her. He did not care about her sudden revelation. His mind was entirely consumed by a singular, agonizing truth. He had spent his entire life trying to buy his way into a legacy desperate for the approval of men who did not look like him. He had placed his complete faith in a white con artist who used forced urban slang to mock their culture, while simultaneously robbing them blind. And the whole time, the true financial genius, the real architect of generational wealth, was the black daughter he had ruthlessly discarded. With shaking, uncoordinated movements, Marcus dug into the pocket of his trousers. He pulled out his cell phone. The screen was cracked from when he had dropped it during the eviction. He opened his contacts and scrolled until he found the emergency number Zuri had used years ago. He had never deleted it, though he had never once bothered to call it to check on her well-being. He pressed the call button. He lifted the phone to his ear, his hand trembling so violently the device rattled against his jaw. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the automated tone of a secure, unmonitored voicemail system beeped sharply. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. Tears, hot and bitter, finally spilled over his lashes and tracked down his deeply lined face. "Zuri," he choked out, his deep voice cracking into a pathetic, ragged whisper. "Zuri, it is your father. I found the envelope. I found the papers at the bottom of a box. Oh my God. Zuri, I am so sorry. I was blind. I was an absolute fool. You tried to warn me. You tried to save us, and I let my pride blind me." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, completely stripped of his country club dignity. The man begging into the phone was broken, destitute, and desperate. I see it now, Zuri. I see everything. Brad played me. He played all of us. But you built an empire. I am so incredibly proud of you. Please just call me back. I do not even care about the money anymore. I just want my daughter back. I want a second chance to be the father you actually deserved. Please, Zuri. Please call me. He lowered the phone, ending the recording. He sat alone in the dim, depressing apartment, waiting for a miracle that would never come. Miles away, the midnight black Maybach glided smoothly down the interstate, insulated from the noise and chaos of the city. Zuri sat in the luxurious rear cabin, her posture relaxed, bathed in the soft ambient lighting of the vehicle. Her secure, encrypted phone vibrated silently on the leather seat beside her. The screen illuminated, displaying a high-priority notification. A new voicemail had been intercepted by her automated screening system. Within seconds, the artificial intelligence software transcribed the audio into a neat, highly legible block of text on the screen. Zuri picked up the phone. She did not press play. She had no desire to hear the auditory performance of her father's weeping. She simply read the transcription. Her eyes scanned the desperate apologies. She read the words where he claimed to be proud of her. She read the part where he begged for a second chance to be a real father. 10 years ago, a message like this would have brought her to her knees. 5 years ago, she would have cried tears of joy, believing that she had finally earned the love and respect she had craved her entire life. She would have called her driver, turned the car around, and rushed to save him from his own mistakes. But today, sitting in the back of a vehicle paid for by her own brilliance, Zuri felt absolutely nothing. There was no surge of vindication. There was no lingering anger. There was no sorrow. There was only a vast, silent, echoing peace. She looked at the transcribed text and analyzed it with the same ruthless objectivity she used to evaluate distressed corporate debt. Marcus was not apologizing because he loved her. He was apologizing because he had lost. If Bradley Pierce had actually doubled the retirement portfolio, Marcus would have never called. If the Buckhead mansion was still in his name, he would still be laughing at her with his wealthy friends. He was only seeking a relationship now because she possessed the capital he desperately needed to survive. The apology was bankrupt. The emotional debt was toxic, and Zuri Jenkins was no longer in the business of acquiring worthless assets. With a steady, unhesitating motion, Zuri tapped the screen. She selected the voicemail file and pressed the delete icon. The message vanished, instantly erased from the server without a single trace. She navigated to the contact settings. She selected Marcus's number and pressed block. The karmic loop was permanently closed. She turned her phone face down on the leather seat and looked out the tinted window at the glowing Atlanta skyline. The city was hers to conquer, and she was finally completely free. The days following the eviction settled into a cold, unbreakable routine. The block on Marcus's personal cell phone was only the first barrier. My security and communications teams were instructed to build an impenetrable digital fortress around my life, ensuring that the radioactive fallout of my family's collapse would never reach my desk. Inside the cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, the silence was deafening. Marcus spent his days sitting in a cheap plastic chair by a small, dirty window, staring at the brick wall of the adjacent building. The adrenaline of the eviction had completely worn off, leaving behind a paralyzing, suffocating depression. He did not eat. He barely drank water. The realization that he had handed his empire to a fraud and permanently alienated the only person capable of saving him played on a continuous, agonizing loop in his mind. He had tried to call me that first night, leaving that weeping, pathetic voicemail, begging for a second chance to be a father. But when he realized his number had been permanently blocked, something inside him finally broke. The arrogant patriarch died in that cheap plastic chair, replaced by a hollow shell of a man waiting for an end that would not come fast enough. Valerie, however, refused to surrender to the silence. Stripped of her country club status and her designer wardrobe, she spiraled into a frantic, toxic delusion. She refused to accept that I had permanently locked them out of the kingdom. When she realized Marcus's phone was blocked, she walked to a local convenience store and bought a cheap prepaid cell phone with the last few dollars of cash she had hidden in her purse. She sat on the stained carpet of the apartment dialing my corporate headquarters over and over again. Kendra, who was now taking 2 city buses to her minimum wage retail job, tried a different tactic. She attempted to bypass the block by calling from the landline in her store's break room during her unpaid 15-minute lunches. At Obsidian Holdings, these frantic, desperate attempts did not even cause a ripple in the workflow. Elena, my fiercely efficient executive assistant, had established a digital quarantine zone. Any incoming communication matching the voice biometrics of Valerie, Kendra, or Marcus was immediately intercepted by our corporate firewall. The calls were routed to a secure server and transcribed by artificial intelligence. The actual audio files never reached my ears. I did not have to listen to the weeping, the manipulation, or the sudden desperate attempts at affection. They were treated exactly like what they were: spam. A week later, I was sitting in the back of my Maybach, heading to a high-stakes commercial real estate auction in downtown Atlanta. The leather seats were warm, the cabin perfectly silent. I opened my encrypted tablet to review my morning briefing. At the bottom of the screen, a secure folder pulsed quietly. It contained the transcripts of 73 intercepted voicemails from my family. I tapped the folder, scrolling through the blocks of text with the same detached analytical gaze I used to review bankruptcy filings. The messages from Valerie were a masterclass in toxic manipulation, cycling wildly through the stages of grief. Zuri, it is Valerie. We are struggling to buy basic groceries. Your father is not well. You cannot just abandon us like this. We are family. The Bible says to honor your parents. A few hours later, the tone would shift to rage. You are an evil, vindictive girl. God will punish you for leaving us in this squalor. I hope you lose every dime. Then by evening, the desperate begging would return. Please, Zuri. I have not eaten a hot meal in 2 days. Just send $1,000. Please. Kendra's transcripts were filled with pathetic entitlement. Zuri, my manager at the store, is treating me like garbage. My feet are bleeding from standing all day. You have millions of dollars. Just send me $50,000 to get a small condo. I promise I will pay you back. Brad ruined my life. Do not punish me for his mistakes. Please, I am your sister. I read the words, looking for any trace of the old wounds. For 32 years, a message like that from Valerie would have triggered a severe anxiety attack. A plea from Kendra would have sparked a complex web of guilt and sibling obligation. A single tear from Marcus would have commanded my absolute obedience. But as the Maybach glided smoothly down the Atlanta highway, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no spike in my heart rate. There was no desire to call them back and gloat. There was no lingering anger. There was no sadness. The trauma bond had been severed at the root. The space in my chest where my desperate need for their validation used to live was now filled with a vast, untouchable peace. I was looking at words spoken by ghosts. They were strangers who simply shared my bloodline, and their suffering was entirely of their own making. I tapped the intercom button, connecting to my assistant at the corporate office. Elena, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. I am looking at the quarantine folder. Yes, Madam CEO. Elena replied instantly, her voice crisp through the vehicle's speakers. Would you like the legal department to draft a formal cease and desist order regarding the continued harassment? No, I stated calmly. Legal action requires acknowledging their existence. They are not worth the billable hours. Select the entire folder. Selected, Elena confirmed. Delete all, I commanded, and purge the server backup. I do not want a single byte of digital space wasted on them. Purged. The quarantine folder is now permanently empty, Elena replied. I closed the application on my tablet. I did not just block their numbers, I erased their digital footprint from my empire. The karmic loop was not just closed. It was welded shut, buried under concrete, and paved over. I turned my attention to the commercial real estate portfolio on my screen. The upcoming auction featured prime downtown properties, and I was preparing a massive cash bid that would fundamentally reshape the city's financial district. My past was dead and buried in a cheap apartment on the outskirts of town. My future, however, was a blank check, and I was the only one holding the pen. 6 months swept by with the unstoppable momentum of a bullet train. The bitter winter of my family's collapse gave way to a brilliant, thriving spring, culminating in a warm September evening in downtown Atlanta. The High Museum of Art was entirely shut down to the general public. Instead, its sweeping white ramps and towering glass atriums were filled with the most formidable minds in the financial sector. This was not the Grand Oak Country Club. There were no desperate social climbers here, no fragile egos hiding behind rented tuxedos and fake accents. This room was packed with actual titans. I stood near the central exhibit holding a flute of vintage champagne. I wore a custom floor-length gown of deep amethyst silk, a color chosen deliberately to project quiet, unshakable sovereignty. Around me stood my true circle. There were powerful black female executives who ran multinational logistics firms, managing partners of venture capital funds, and brilliant economists who shaped public policy. They did not care about my last name. They did not care who my father was. They respected me because my portfolio was flawless, my strategies were ruthless, and my intellect was undeniable. David Sterling, my lead attorney, raised his glass toward me from across the atrium. Elena, my indispensable executive assistant, was coordinating the caterers with her usual lethal efficiency. I looked at them and realized that this was what a real family looked like. A family built on mutual respect, shared ambition, and unwavering loyalty. A family that did not require me to shrink myself to make them feel tall. The gentle chime of a crystal glass being tapped drew my attention. The ambient music faded into the background. It was time. I handed my champagne to a passing waiter and made my way toward the transparent acrylic podium set up beneath a massive soaring sculpture. As I walked, the crowd parted not out of the awkward pity I had experienced at that miserable retirement gala 6 months ago, but out of profound, genuine respect. The applause started before I even reached the microphone, a rolling wave of validation that warmed the very center of my chest. I stepped up to the podium and looked out over the sea of faces. Hundreds of brilliant, successful people were looking back at me, waiting for my words. I placed my hands flat on the edges of the podium, grounding myself in the reality of what I had built. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice echoing clearly through the museum's impeccable acoustics. "We talk a lot about legacy in our line of work. We talk about generational wealth, compound interest, and the transfer of assets. But for a very long time, I was taught a highly distorted version of what a legacy actually is." The room was entirely silent, hanging on every syllable. I did not mention Marcus. I did not mention Valerie. I did not need to give them power by uttering their names in this sacred space. But the subtext was universally understood by those who knew my story. I was taught that a legacy was about proximity to power. I continued, my gaze steady and unflinching. I was taught that it was about hoarding status, keeping up appearances, and stepping on anyone who threatened a fragile illusion of perfection. But true legacy has absolutely nothing to do with the image you project. True legacy is about the foundation you pour. True legacy is measured by the doors you kick open for the people standing behind you. I paused, letting the truth of those words settle over the audience. I thought about the yellowed bank receipt from my biological mother. I thought about the $50,000 that had saved my life when I was sleeping on a broken mattress in a roach-infested apartment. Many years ago, a woman who loved me very much left me a small, hidden financial lifeline. I said, my voice softening just a fraction. It was seed money. It was protection. But more importantly, it was a profound act of belief. She believed that if I had the capital, I could build my own table instead of begging for a seat at someone else's. She was right. I took that seed and I grew an empire. But an empire is entirely meaningless if you are the only one ruling it. I looked directly at a group of young, brilliant financial analysts I had personally mentored over the past few months. That is why we are here tonight, I announced, projecting my voice to reach the furthest corners of the atrium. I am incredibly proud to officially launch the Obsidian Scholars Program. A ripple of excited murmurs swept through the crowd. I pressed a button on the podium, and the massive digital screens flanking the stage lit up with the Foundation's sleek, powerful branding. Starting this upcoming academic year, Obsidian Holdings is establishing a perpetual endowment fund, I declared. We are offering comprehensive full-ride scholarships to 50 Black women pursuing degrees in finance economics and corporate law at historically Black colleges and universities across the country. The crowd erupted into spontaneous applause, but I raised my hand, signaling that I was not finished. The applause quickly died down. They wanted to hear the rest. This is not just about paying for tuition, room, and board, I continued, ensuring my tone conveyed absolute, uncompromising commitment. We are not just giving these young women a degree, we are giving them equity. Upon graduation, every single Obsidian scholar will be provided with $50,000 in seed capital, completely debt-free, to launch their own investment portfolios or fund their own startups. We are bypassing the systemic barriers of the banking system. We are eradicating the need for predatory loans. We are giving them the exact same lifeline that was given to me. We are building the next generation of titans, and we are doing it on our own terms. The museum literally shook. The audience did not just applaud, they roared. Powerful executives, self-made billionaires, and community leaders rose to their feet in a massive, overwhelming standing ovation. I looked out at the brilliant, beautiful faces of the women in the front row. They were cheering, some with tears of genuine pride gleaming in their eyes. This was my legacy. I was not hoarding wealth to buy country club memberships or impress superficial socialites. I was weaponizing my capital to dismantle the financial hurdles that had kept women who looked like me locked out of the boardroom for generations. I stood at the podium, bathing in the sheer, undeniable reality of my triumph. The broken, discarded college dropout was dead. The useful, visionary CEO had taken her place. I offered a deep, gracious nod to the audience, stepped away from the microphone, and walked down the steps of the stage. David and Elena were waiting at the bottom, their faces split into massive, proud smiles. Colleagues rushed forward to shake my hand, offering their congratulations and pledging their own capital to join the Foundation's initiatives. I was surrounded by a wall of genuine, authentic love and respect. I reached into my designer clutch to retrieve my phone, intending to check the time before the main dinner service commenced. My fingers brushed against the sleek metal of the device. It vibrated sharply against my palm. I pulled the phone out and glanced at the bright screen. It was not an email from a donor. It was not a text from my executive team. The screen displayed an incoming text message from an entirely unknown number. I stared down at the glowing screen of my phone. The 11-digit number at the top was entirely unfamiliar, lacking any saved contact name or area code I immediately recognized. The ambient noise of the charity gala, the clinking of crystal, the warm laughter, and the soft jazz playing through the museum speakers seemed to fade into a dull hum. I swiped my thumb across the glass, unlocking the device, and opened the message. It was a brief text, but every single word dripped with the suffocating, desperate toxicity I had spent the last 6 months systematically purging from my life. Zuri, it is Valerie. We are struggling to buy groceries. Please, Zuri. We are family. I stood perfectly still in the shadow of the soaring acrylic sculpture. I read the 2 sentences again. Valerie had obviously walked into another corner store, dug into whatever meager cash reserves they had left, and purchased yet another cheap prepaid burner phone just to bypass my corporate firewall. She had sat in that cramped, dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city, typed out those words, and hit send, praying that the sheer weight of societal obligation would force my hand. We are family. I let the phrase roll around in my mind. Family. For 32 years, that word had been a weapon forged specifically to keep me in my place. It was the justification for my father's emotional neglect. It was the shield Valerie used to deflect accountability for her cruelty. It was the excuse Kendra wielded to fund her reckless vanity. They had weaponized the concept of blood relation, twisting it into a heavy, suffocating chain designed to drag me down to their level. They believed that biology was a lifetime contract for abuse, and that my eventual success obligated me to fund their delusions. I did not feel a sudden spike of adrenaline. My hands did not shake. The familiar crushing anxiety that used to grip my chest whenever my stepmother demanded my attention was completely absent. Instead, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of clarity. I lifted my gaze from the glowing screen and looked out across the magnificent, brightly lit atrium of the museum. The space was alive with genuine brilliance. At a table near the front, I saw a group of the newly crowned Obsidian scholars. They were young, ambitious black women, their faces glowing with absolute joy and fierce determination. One of them was wiping away a tear as she hugged a fellow recipient. Another was animatedly discussing market trends with a senior partner from a global venture capital firm. They were networking, they were building alliances, they were claiming their rightful space in a world that had historically tried to lock them out. I looked at those young women, and I saw myself 10 years ago. I saw the girl who had walked out of a sprawling Buckhead mansion with nothing but a yellowed bank receipt and a broken heart. I remembered the nights I spent eating cheap noodles, staying awake until 3 in the morning to teach myself corporate restructuring, terrified of failing because I had absolutely no safety net. But unlike me, these women would never have to endure a decade of isolation and financial starvation to prove their worth. They would never have to sit at a dinner table where their intellect was mocked or their presence was considered a burden. They would never be forced to shrink themselves to accommodate the fragile egos of mediocre men. They would never have to beg for a seat at the table because I had just spent my fortune building an entirely new table exclusively for them. I shifted my gaze to the other side of the room. I saw David Sterling laughing warmly with my executive team. I saw Elena coordinating the evening with flawless grace. I saw investors, mentors, and friends who respected my mind and honored my strict boundaries. This was my family. The people in this room were my chosen bloodline. We were connected not by genetic coincidence, but by shared vision, mutual respect, and an unyielding commitment to elevating one another. I had cultivated a kingdom of actual substance while Marcus and Valerie were permanently trapped in the ruins of their hollow illusions. I looked back down at the phone in my hand. Valerie was waiting for a response. She was sitting in the dark, staring at her burner phone, hoping for anger, hoping for an argument, hoping for a sliver of engagement. She wanted a fight, because a fight would mean she still mattered. She believed that the guilt of my massive success would eventually break my resolve and force me to save them from their own catastrophic failures. She thought the old Zuri, the desperate daughter who just wanted to be loved, was still hiding somewhere deep inside me. She was wrong. That version of me died the night I dropped the black envelope on the cocktail table and walked out of the country club. I placed my thumb over the screen. I did not type out a scathing reply. I did not remind her of the eviction, the stolen retirement funds, or the fake real estate portfolios. I did not even bother to navigate to the settings menu to block this new number. A response of any kind, even a rejection, was a currency I was no longer willing to spend on them. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was not the cold, terrifying smirk I had worn in the penthouse boardroom when I dismantled their lives. It was a warm, radiant smile born of absolute, untouchable peace. I tapped the screen once, closing the messaging application entirely. I let the screen go dark. I slid the phone smoothly into my designer clutch and snapped the gold clasp shut. The sharp, satisfying click of the metal echoed the finality in my soul. The book was closed. The karmic loop was sealed. The story of Zuri the scapegoat was officially permanently over. A waiter in a crisp white uniform walked past my position, carrying a silver tray lined with fresh beverages. I reached out and took a chilled crystal flute of champagne. The glass was cool and heavy in my hand, grounding me beautifully in the present moment. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp, sparkling liquid wash away the last lingering phantom of my past. I turned my back on the shadows of the museum alcove. I stepped forward, my deep amethyst silk gown flowing gracefully behind me, and walked directly back into the brilliant, blinding lights of the gala. I walked toward my friends, my scholars, and the magnificent empire I had built from the ground up. I was completely, unequivocally free. The most powerful lesson from Zuri's journey is that true family is defined by mutual respect, not just shared DNA. When people constantly diminish your worth and exploit your loyalty, walking away is not a betrayal. It is a necessary act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, nor can you save people who are determined to destroy themselves for the sake of shallow appearances. True success lies in taking the pain inflicted upon you and transforming it into a legacy that lifts up others. Your peace is your ultimate asset. Protect it ruthlessly. Hit the like button and subscribe if you are ready to cut the toxicity out of your life and start building your own empire.